A strong India-U.S. partnership can anchor peace, prosperity, and stability from Asia to Africa and from Indian Ocean to the Pacific.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's speech before the U.S. Congress marks a new chapter in India-U.S. relations. Hello, I'm Nathan King, filling in for Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Just 3 years ago, diplomatic and economic relations between the US and India were strained at best. But under the leadership of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the two countries are entering an unprecedented era of cooperation. During a 3-day visit to Washington, D.C., Modi met with US President Barack Obama, delivered a speech before the houses of the US Congress, and announced agreements on energy, defense and trade. We begin our special coverage with CCTV's Rowie Rutenberg. Rowie, thanks for joining us. This was Narendra Modi's 4th visit to the United States since assuming office in 2014. What do you think was accomplished?
Well, in his own words, this was really a new moment in U.S. relations, a sharp contrast away from this era of suspicion. Remember, Modi was once denied entry to the U.S. because of an obscure law. Now, here he was in Washington this week, emphasizing the common set of values between Americans and Indians, as he saw it. A close personal connection, he said, between the two societies, talking about all sorts of things, defense cooperation, specifically joint patrols in the Indian Ocean, better integration of the two navies, and a joint outlook on Afghanistan and global terrorism. A lot of progress, we understand, on that front. And also climate change, Modi seeking better access to renewable energy technology. I think he also made clear that he wanted to see India elevated to great power status and to position New Delhi as a counterweight to Beijing's growing influence in Asia. He met with leaders from the U.S.-India Business Council and delivered that message very loudly. He awarded Amazon's CEO, for example, with the prize, and in return the e-commerce giant pledged to invest another $3 billion in India. These, of course, are all tangibles that Modi was able to take home with him. Nathan?
Rowie, in that speech before a joint session of Congress, Prime Minister Modi addressed freedom of navigation, which sometimes can be coded as sort of finger-pointing at China.
Indeed, and we should point out that India has resisted pointing that finger directly at China in either the South or East China Seas, and that's despite U.S. pressure coming from Washington. In fact, there was no reference to the South China Sea in any joint communique. Here's what Modi had to say.
India is already assuming her responsibilities in securing the Indian Ocean region. A strong India-U.S. partnership can anchor peace, prosperity, and stability from Asia to Africa and from Indian Ocean to the Pacific. It can also help ensure security of the sea lanes of commerce and freedom of navigation on seas.
I think these comments, or comments like these, really reflect Indian resistance in getting involved in the South China Sea, and that's a sharp contrast to what we've seen from U.S. allies getting fully integrated, allies like Japan, Philippines, and Australia when it comes to this issue. Nathan?
Rowie, the United States is supporting India's efforts to become a part of this nuclear suppliers group, a group of countries that want to promote non-proliferation of weapons, work towards nuclear policy together. What does this membership mean for India?
Yeah, we're talking about a group of 48 nuclear trading nations. Essentially, they regulate nuclear trade, and membership confirms nuclear energy power's status. Now, the U.S. wants India to join, and it's heavily investing in India's nuclear power industry. In fact, 6 nuclear power stations are planned. Now, some countries in the group, including China, have concerns as India has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. And because the 48-member group requires consensus, India's membership could block Pakistan's application to join. It's still uncertain, though, and India's membership will be considered at a meeting of the Nuclear Suppliers Group later this month. Nathan?
Ray Rutenberg, thank you very much. Well, joining us now in our Washington, D.C. studio is Haiyan Wang. She's the managing partner of the China-India Institute. Also with us is Sadanand Thume. He is a resident fellow with the American Enterprise Institute and South Asia columnist for the Wall Street Journal. And we're also joined by Aparna Pandey. She's the director of the Hudson Institute's initiative on the future of India and South Asia. Now, I want to begin with all of you. Just a quick take on what do you think was the most important achievement. Let's start from the far end here.
Nathan, we must remember that that from U.S. point of view, India has been the preferred partner in the region since 1947. It was India's reluctance to choose sides in the Cold War which has delayed this partnership.
And they were not aligned.
Yeah, and India's first Prime Minister came here in 1949. He addressed the Congress in 1949. But India didn't want to choose sides. And so it's basically, I'd say, a long courtship which has finally reached, let's say, a consummation, a relationship, finally.
So the relationship is important, Sadan?
Yeah, I'd say important visit for many reasons. But if I had to pick one, I would say that the Prime Minister's speech to the joint session of Congress really stood out.
Why?
Because it stood out in terms of its symbolism. It stood out in terms of his being able to make a connection with Congress, which was quite obvious in the spontaneous responses to him. And it stood out really in terms of clearly positioning India in the minds of U.S. lawmakers as a friend, not just in a narrow bilateral sense, but as a friend in a larger global sense.
I liked his joke about the dysfunction of U.S. politics. That was great, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Indian democracy as well. I thought that was very funny. Haiyan Wang, what do you think?
I also think that it is really cemented the goodwill. It ensures the momentum of deepening the relationships that will continue despite the administration's change. And you can sense the bipartisan support for deepening, for accelerating the development of this, India-U.S. relationships. I think that goodwill is clearly evident, and that is the biggest accomplishment. Of course, there is a substantive progress made as well.
Let's break down some issues. Climate change, obviously on the heels of the Paris Climate Agreement. Aparna, a commitment by India to fully join the treaty. Well, it's not a treaty because the Americans wouldn't be able to pass it if it's not the agreement. That's a success for the U.S. that has seen India as perhaps a reluctant partner in climate change?
Reluctant partner, it's more that, the two countries are very alike. Both of them do not want to make commitments unless it is something which they want. So it's kind of, India calls it strategic autonomy, US has been a little isolationist. So both want to make agreements, but agreements which are seen as Washington deciding it rather than somebody else imposing it on them. So that's the only difference. So India has agreed to it. It's just that New Delhi wants it to seem as though it's Delhi making the decision, not Washington, D.C. imposing it on.
And also not make commitments, I suppose, ahead of the U.S.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I'll make just 2 quick points on that. The first is I do think that there is a difference in approach between this Indian government and the previous Indian government, to the degree that this government seems to be on this particular issue more oriented towards problem solving, and that's certainly something that has been appreciated in the US administration. The second is that I think the degree of Indian acceptance has been somewhat oversold. If you look at the language, it's very carefully worded, and what it basically says, it's a bit of a fudge that India will work towards it. And the reason for that is really simple, which is that even though at this point it seems somewhat unlikely that Mr. Trump is going to be the next US president, I don't think anyone is, going to, India is certainly not going to plunge in until the political situation is clearer.
But on that, I think that the change of position, we've seen that change of position even last year in reaching the Paris Agreement. And I think it has come to the point that India recognized that India's development path cannot be a heavily polluted, cannot be a carbon intensive.
Similarities
growth.
with China here.
Exactly. They've learned lessons. You go to Delhi, it's choking air. And 8 out of the 10 dirtiest cities with dirtiest areas in India. I think it has come to the point that India has to deal with it regardless of what external pressures is or is not there.
And one big thing, of course, is that renewables are now a big industry as well. 6 nuclear power plants, yes. Westinghouse is going to build potentially India. That deal is, you can argue about nuclear power being renewables, but that's going to go a long way. Is that going to help cement the two countries, do you think?
Yes, but you could, I mean, you have to remember that when the nuclear deal was signed, it wasn't a promise, but it was something which people believed in, that American companies would establish reactors. And so it's
And that
been
was all the way back in
2005 when it was agreed. 2008, India actually, the Indian parliament accepted it.
So it's been a long time coming.
It's been a long time. So it's a long time coming, and it's more a question of, from the Indian point of view, the nuclear deal was more symbolic. From the American point of view, it was, there was this desire by the American corporates that there would be some benefit, and that's been about, let's say, 11 years coming. But it does send a signal that, India is ready for business. It's part of what the Prime Minister was saying, that we are making changes, we are improving the environment, ease of doing business in India, and this is part of that.
So
I just want to echo that quickly. I mean, I think that, the greatest significance of those 6 nuclear reactors is to remove a thorn in the relationship. So I testified before the Senate last month, and what had been left behind by the inability to consummate this deal commercially was a sense of bad blood, was a sense in the U.S. Congress that, well, they went out on a limb to bring in to strike this deal with India, but India, on its part, was not able to keep its side of the bargain. So while moving towards this has environmental and commercial aspects, the single most important aspect of this is political.
What about the Nuclear Suppliers Group membership? Very few people have actually heard of this group, but India really wants to be part of it. Why? And what are the problems?
I think that why is that, definitely India wants to be recognized as a nuclear power, and also it regulates, be part of the regulation in terms of trading of the nuclear fuels, materials, and etc. It does have a significance, and the blockage right now seems to be originating from India. I'm sorry, from China. Not from India, from China, in terms of India hasn't signed the non-proliferation treaty. And to what extent?
And could also block Pakistan's membership.
Yeah, Pakistan, whether that could be, coattailed or linked together. But my sense is eventually, probably India will join the group, because the overwhelming majority of the current members are supporting India joining. So.
What about the overall investment environment in India? We saw the Amazon head, Bezos, get an award, $3 billion more investment announced. But there is a feeling here in the US, rightly or wrongly, that India is a hard place to get investment in. Facebook had a terrible experience there, even though India is extremely technologically savvy. What's the outlook looking like for more investment in both countries?
I think the outlook has improved in the last 2 years, but it's not improved as much as the expectation. When Mr. Modi came into power 2 years ago, there was expectation that things would turn around overnight. Now, it's true, things don't turn around overnight, but there was an expectation. And so it's not changed as much as the expectation was. And the big reforms which people expected the government to make have not yet been made. They've made some reforms, code recently, most likely the goods and services tax will be passed, but India is still quite low on the ease of doing business rankings, and there are still rules and regulations which make it difficult for not just foreign businesses but even domestic businesses to do well in India. So it's a little better, but not as much as people expected.
I travelled here in India in the era of thumbs-up cola. They didn't allow, Coca-Cola or Pepsi.
To tell the tale.
I liked it.
I still like it.
But Salam, seriously, is there that sort of legacy of, system economic exploitation still in India?
I think certainly not from the government when it comes to foreign investment. I agree with Aparna that the government has been slower than expected in rolling out many long-awaited domestic reforms, but it has certainly been extremely eager in rolling out a red carpet for foreign direct investment, and that has been one of its signature economic achievements so far. So when you talk to businessmen, there is by and large, I would say there is enthusiasm, because no one expects India to turn into Denmark or Singapore overnight in terms of ease of doing business. What people are looking for is direction. And certainly India is moving in the right direction on this front.
One thing that struck me is the similarities. Sorry, you're going to make a point.
I think India has made a significant progress in terms of attracting foreign direct investment. Last year, India took in $60 billion FDI. Of course, that pales to China's taking in over 100 billion. But India's economy is only 1/4 the size of China's economy. So a quarter size of China's economy taking about half the size of China's FDI. That is very impressive. And even though the land acquisition law has not been really passed, but the states are putting together the state land bank to get the lands and to provide to foreign investors. I sense an overwhelming enthusiasm in tapping into India's fast growth story, jumping onto that growth wagon, whether it's American companies or Indian companies, European companies or Japanese companies or Chinese companies. They see the next big market. The growth story is in India. And with China's rising labor costs, and I think India will be the destination and fast-growing, attractive destination for FDI.
Great, we have to take a break, but I want to get into the whole strategic significance of this trip when we come back. We'll take a break, but more of our conversation on India-US relations after this. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back to The Heat. We're discussing Indian Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States and what was accomplished. Let's pick up with our panel. You know, I promised to get onto the strategic aspects after the break. Let's start with you, Aparna. You know, obviously terrorism, a joint concern of both India and the US. Let's just have a listen to Prime Minister Modi on that.
We have both lost civilians and soldiers in combating terrorism. The need of the hour is for us to deepen our security cooperation and base it on a policy that isolates those who harbor, support, and sponsor terrorists.
Now, of course, that's very true, but the US in the region has had a strong alliance with Pakistan when it comes to counterterrorism for a long time. Aparna, are we seeing a shift here?
Actually, the shift has been happening for a few years now. It's not recent. The shift started.
Why?
The shift started primarily after 9/11, and when American soldiers actually went into Afghanistan, and American lives were lost, especially soldiers, and those lives were lost because of Pakistan-based terrorist groups, and that continues to this day. It has increased after the killing of bin Laden, who was found in Pakistan, and continues. Mullah Mansour's killing just a few months ago. So there's a growing belief in the United States, both among the policymakers as well in the government and people outside, that Pakistan has not been as good an ally, and that India is the real ally in the region. That doesn't mean that ties with Pakistan have been broken off. Pakistan is subject to a lot more questioning, and for example, Pakistan wanted to purchase F-16s from the United States. The resistance came from Congress. That, you can buy them, but we will not use American taxpayer money to
finance them.
To finance for a country which is small.
So, no, I just want to follow on, but I just want to make this point, that India and the US cooperating over Afghanistan, you would never really thought it, considering the different views they had from the Soviet invasion onwards.
Well, that's true of many aspects of the US-India relationship, right?
Yeah.
The Cold War was a completely different game. On Pakistan and terrorism, I'd say that yes, the US and India have a mission, but it does remain a fraught issue, because the Indian view is, I think correctly, that the Pakistanis have not gone after terrorists who target India. Just the other day, Hafiz Saeed was, seen on top of a bus in some public rally. And these are people who have the blood of civilians on their hands, many, many people. And there is a certain amount of resentment in India that the US, despite its close relationship with Pakistan, has not been able to kind of affect a change in behavior. You can argue that that criticism is unfair, because the same Pakistani groups have also gone out and killed Americans in Pakistan, and the US has not been able to really check that either.
What about the strategic links, Haiyan, when it comes to the Navy, the Indian Ocean? There seems to be a lot more joint exercises planned, a lot more interoperability, as they call it,
Yes.
between forces. Is that going to work?
work for what purposes?
Exactly.
So I think that we have seen accelerated number of, actually India does more the military, the naval exercise with the U.S. than with any other countries. But those joint exercises need not be interpreted as directing against China. I think that India being right there and wants to project itself as a military power. I also think that India is trying very hard to build its own military capacity. But we cannot just say because of that, this cementing of the military cooperation is really with an eye towards against China. Cannot make that conclusion.
Aparna, the U.S. seems to want to push India in that direction.
It does, and I mean, the Malabar exercises, which are supposed to start in a few days, China has always perceived them as, because it's India, U.S., Japan is going to join it, as something which is targeted, or at least looks like an encirclement, China. Yeah. And therefore, India stopped including Japan in 2007. It's almost after 9 years that India has asked Japan to again become a partner in these exercises. So there's a perception there. But it's, I mean, I think it's kind of a balancing act where, there are Malabar exercises and India is talking about selling BrahMos missiles to Vietnam and a few other countries because it also sees an encirclement. It sees China's very close ties with Pakistan, including nuclear ties, manufacturing of military equipment like GF-17s, and even terrorism. We're talking about Lashkar-e-Taiba and Hafiz Saeed. China has consistently blocked Jamaat-ud-Dawa and other terrorist groups in the UN Security Council. Any action against them primarily because of Pakistan. And that's something which India would like. I mean, India wants China to remove that hold and stop blocking action against terrorist groups.
So, Donald, do you want to pick up on that and also entertain this thought? Are we seeing this India, China, Pakistan axis?
I mean, we don't want to exaggerate it, but I think you are seeing at least the contours of it to a certain extent. Now, obviously, India has no desire to pick any kind of fight with China. India has been very clear about that. But at the same time, what you are seeing is an India that is acting more assertive and less diffident when it comes to pursuing its own defense interests, particularly in terms of cooperation with the U.S. So that's really the difference. Has India suddenly, turned into a country that wants to confront China over some, rocky atoll in the middle of nowhere? Answer is no.
No, and they're adamant.
Right.
Yeah.
But is India a country that says that, well, should it not exercise with Japan just because China might be upset? The answer to that is also no.
I think that non-alignment that India has adopted as a foreign policy for a long time, that really serves India's interest the best.
Well, Nehru was the founder of the non-alignment.
Yeah, exactly. I think non-alignment, India right now is walled by many countries, by Japan, Australia, by US, by the European countries, by China. So the more bidders there are, the higher the prices go. Well, and I think that being somewhat neutral, but non-alignment, not to jump onto either camp, I think serves the India the interest the most.
I want to jump into that because I think that if it is in China's interest for India to be quote-unquote non-aligned, then I think China hurts its interests by doing things like blocking the terrorism resolution against Masood Azhar, or publicly saying that it wants India not to join the NSG. Because what that does in terms of public opinion in India is to sort of push India more away from China because it sort of sees China as naturally confronting it. So I think if the Chinese goal is for India to kind of, which is India's instinct, you're right, and is India's political history, then I'd say that I don't think China is playing its cards very wisely.
But China, last month when Indian president visited China, both governments clearly made it clear that China and India wants to accelerate the resolution of the border issues. And I think that sounds also a goodwill, sends a strong signal that China and India want to remain friends, if not strategic allies. Yes. And on the economic integration front, we see China and India equally want to deepen the relationship, accelerate the development on the economic front as well.
The U.S.-India relationship is not happening in a vacuum, is it? And but are we seeing upon a sort of great power balancing in this region? Do you think?
Not great power balancing, but I'd say, there are a number of regional powers and aspiring global powers which are playing a balancing game. None of the powers in the region or beyond want a war or a conflict. And so I echo what Sadanand said that, India would like good relations with China. India doesn't want any conflict, but India does believe that that it has the right to, have military exercises with Japan, and China should not have a problem. It does believe that that doesn't mean that it will continue to have close economic ties with China. It would like the border dispute to be resolved, or it would like China to respect the fact that India has an interest in Tibet. So, a balancing game, except what the other side wants, but India has certain interests, it is a rising power, and it believes it should be accepted as one.
Last word to Haiyan Wang here. Obama and Modi, are they really as good friends as they make out, as the protocol makes out? Because a lot of the coverage has been very sickening, like they're brothers or something.
The brother romance or
bromance, yes.
whatever that is, it lasts for a few more months. So the new chapter opens when the new president, comes in next year. It appears to be, but I think that is more driven by strategic interest than just the personal rapport.
Well, so this bromance is not monogamous because Modi has other bromances too. Which are? Abe, for instance. Abe. So you should sort of place this in context. It does seem, to sort of not be facetious, that the president and the prime minister do have a good, warm personal relationship, but I agree with Haiyan, it's driven by national interest. Well, we're going to have to leave that there. Thume, thank you so much, Haiyan Wang as well, and obviously Aparna Pandey, thanks so much for joining us. That's all we have time for on this edition of The Heat. I'm Nathan King, Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.